Hello, my name is William, the avid reader, and today I'm reviewing Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, written by Thomas Sowell in 2000. And this is the 5th edition, so this is written in 2015, so it's a bit weird about discussing about this book in the its edition, and which year it was written, because usually an updated edition includes a little more in a book, but these ones are heavily expanded. So is it written in 2000 or 2015? I'm not sure. It's a book on economics, on different things. There are 7 parts in it, and it looks at from the Chicago School of Monetarism perspective in economics, since Thomas Sowell is a student of Milton Friedman. And it's a big read. The chapters have a lot of content, and he goes into detail about a lot of things, but he writes things very clearly. So a thing might be complicated and you might have to read it a couple times again. However, you can, if you stop to think about it a bit, you understand what everything he's writing, basically. It's not, as long as, if you have a lot of time to kill and you want to think about how the economy works, then you can understand how this works. If you're a casual reader, you are not going to understand anything here. Really, not much. So you've got 7 parts. So part 1 is on prices and markets. So the central thing for market economics are prices, and he compares that, talks about how countries where price economies prices matter a lot. It's a way to decide the costs and how things work in the economy, how much you're gonna pay, how much it costs to produce. That's what the role of prices. And people have to invest, so they have to make a some profit from it. While and that's how it works in a market economy. In a socialist economy, since it's controlled and centrally planned, then the prices cannot adapt to changes in the system, like inflow or outflow of resources. And he repeats a lot of times the resources that have alternative uses. So if you say a resource will go here, then you're not allowing it to go to where it would naturally go, where it's most efficient, because prices decide where resources are most efficient recently. And when the government gets involved, it is less efficient. It goes to secondary or worse. And so price controls are bad. There's more demand when prices are full. So that means that when you have rent control and people cannot make profit from being landlords, and there will be much more demand, and people have no incentive to invest in creating new apartments and being landlords, but people are incentivized to go and buy these apartments. And also this behavior to make things affordable makes people economize a lot less. So in the past, when you lived with your family or with some friends to save any money, but in rent control you don't do that. But the long-term consequences is that the rent controlled buildings are starting to deteriorate, and often there are exemptions to expensive buildings for rich. So the only people who ironically can benefit from this are rich landowners. They're the only ones who operate successfully in this system. So that's part 1. Part 2 is industry and commerce. So that talks about mainly businesses and how economies of scale, so businesses at scale, so things become more efficient when they become bigger. So that's why things aren't always linear, they can be exponential. And regulation and antitrust laws, that tends to favor actually some big businesses over others. So, but however, and monopolies, a thing important to remember is a natural monopoly is very rare. They happen sometimes. They are not permanent usually. However, so if there's a monopoly, or if there's a bunch of businesses who are keeping prices, who are coordinating to screw over the populace, because remember, you raise prices, you don't necessarily get more money because people will just buy less. then you can have competition who are playing by the rules, or not really by the rules, but are doing customs that make sense, and their businesses thrive, while people who practice controlled prices, they screw each other over and things like that. So yeah, antitrust laws, they tend to benefit the incumbent businesses, so innovation is stifled by regulation. So then you have part 3, so part 3 that covers work and pay, so there's a fair wage and things like that. Your labor is not determined by how much you work necessarily. It does not determine how much you should be paid, because if you're using technology which makes you more efficient, then you're contributing more to the business's earnings, so you can be paid more. So it makes sense. That's it. That is why businesses often invest in developed economies instead of in developed ones, even though workers are paid better in developed economies, because the technology makes everything more efficient, so they can pay workers better. But on the differences of workers in different countries, that later. So minimum wage law, that keeps out people who are trying to enter the working force. So it benefits people who are already working, unless they get laid off, then they're done. And yeah, minimum wage. So, and the irony, these laws, regulations, they may benefit the groups, the so-called marginalized groups. So before you had all these regulations, blacks were prospering much better relatively in the United States than they are now with all these regulations. So, or 4. So this is time and risk. So this covers investments and stocks and bonds and insurance. And it says price gouging is not really a true thing, and people are invested. If you are trying to pay people better, more than they are worth, then investors will go elsewhere. Usually they will take their money out of places. And it talks about stocks and bonds, insurance and bonds. People invest in bonds because they're relatively safe, while stocks there's more risk but more opportunity. Oh yeah, that's an important fix. When you have profits, you also have to have losses. So there's a self-regulating economy in the sense that strategies that are failures do not reward companies, while when government is involved, they can, because there's no mechanics to get rid of the bad. But people buy insurance because they transfer the risk to people who have better knowledge of things. Same thing with stocks and bonds sometimes. That's why you have stockbrokers. And then part 5, that's the national economy. So you got national output, and he talks about the money and banking system and how inflation can be caused by the government horribly, but the gold standard is not necessarily necessary, and government can sometimes promote finance with the Federal Reserve. However, there may be problems. And oh yeah, that's true. National economy. The banking system is very good for the economy, and it improves it by having people who have put money in the bank. It pulls money of people, and then it permits banks to invest or give out loans and things like that. So the countries which have the banking system installed are much more prosperous than countries that don't. And that's why countries that have recently become capitalistic, they tend to have a lot of foreign bankers. That's why they have a lot of foreign investors, because there's no skills in the local populace, so they import it. And then he talks about the international economy. So there's discussion about trade and how trade deficits do not tell you anything of how good a country is doing usually. This is a mercantilist view, and this is good for relative power. Otherwise it doesn't matter, your trade deficit. And when you've got transfers of wealth, so people donate their money, and for example expats, Mexicans in the United States donate money to their families in Mexico. And then you've got charities, but non-profit organizations tend to be less not does not offer as good a service as a market, as a corporation, business does, because businesses, you can go somewhere else. With a non-profit you can't. And for international disparities of wealth, it isn't really based on imperialism or natural resources, because you've got Hong Kong, that's dirt poor, that has barely any resources, and that's very rich. And then you've got Central African countries like the Congo, they have plenty of resources, but they're dirt poor. And yeah, also there's talk about how you've got minorities who are usually disproportionately wealthy. They come from places that are very poor, but the skill set in that country is good. It's just that either because of government regulations or because of the climate, they have not been able to prosper yet. So you got immigrants, so you've got the Chinese who go to Southeast Asia, and Jews try going to different countries, and you've got the Lebanese in West Africa, and they had these countries prosper, but the politicians, they use this to make tensions between these different groups of people. So what is good economics is not good politics always. So there's a big distinction between economics and politics, and because economics is just, here's the facts. It's an ugly truth often, but that's how it is. You cannot control the world. Or politics, I promise you to do this. And people should focus much more on the consequences and the incentives that different parties create instead of what the goals are. You have to look at the real facts and not at what you want to be true. So that's some lessons from basic economics. There are a lot of good lessons from this book. And since things are repeated in many different forms, you understand them quite well. There's a reason you've got 27 chapters, because it takes a big book to explain how different things work. And also there's pointing out that governments haven't really stopped financial crises. And previously in the 1800s, for example, they weren't really involved, and none of the financial crises in the 1800s were as bad as the one in the 20th or the 21st century. And then part 7 is special economic issues. So he talks about some myths, which have been discussed previously in the book, but here's a bit more specific. Then he talks about these so-called non-economic values. Well, economics, according to him, usually governs everything. So non-economic values aren't really true, and it's just people who are pretending to be high almighty to get power. And then he talks about the history of economics and different things being, schools of thought being made. So the first free market schools of thought was in France, pretty much. In the 1700s, a few decades before Adam Smith, and before that you had the mercantilized view, and this was for governments to prosper, not for the economy as a whole. And he has previously talked about tax cuts. But yeah, he talks about Adam Smith, who is the father of modern economics. And he goes onward to talk about other economists like David Ricardo, and the first hired economist at the university was in the early 1800s. And then you have got the schools of thought formed like Keynesianism and Marxism and the Chicago School. So yeah, it's interesting. And you've got some questions here at the end, 20 pages of questions. So you can, if you want to really remember everything you've read, you got plenty of questions to answer in this book, because you're giving. So economists from different schools usually agree on the methods, on the things they want to do. So Marx and Engels, we know they're not free market at all, but they do understand some of free market principles are true. Same thing with John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes, there's a saying that we are all Keynesian, and none of us are Keynesian, because some of the things John Maynard Keynes beliefs are true and have been proven to be true, and some things are wrong. So his ideology has Keynesians, they have come up with things that he didn't think about. And then you've got Friedman, he comes on later, and yeah, but Marx, Keynes and Friedman, they all agree on some things. So yeah, and you have got to remember there's the distinction between good politics and good economics. So you want a lot of power, screw the economy, because people have very short memories on political decisions, on policies. So you're gonna do A, to improve it, and then it turns out that it doesn't. So 5 years later, and people forgot that it was caused by your policy. So yeah, so the incentives you created made everything worse, and the consequences, yeah. Instead of the goals you were advocating, but you can claim, oh, you need more and more and more. So yeah, it's a detailed read, and I'm already a libertarian. This is from the Chicago School. I'm not sure exactly which school of economics I'm from. I'm more leaning Austrian probably, but yeah, this is a very good author, a very good conservative, and this is you understand. This is an American conservative towards what the so-called American liberal is. So yeah, an interesting read. So how would I rate Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell? I would say 9 out of 10. This book, of the book non-fiction books I've read so far, is the best one. Everything is clear. Everything is clear language. The concepts, there may be complicated a lot sometimes. You have to reread things, so that sucks a bit. But it makes you think a lot. And if you did not come from the right wing where you're skeptical of government, if you are reading with an open mind, this will make you skeptical of government. So yes, 9 out of 10. Thomas Sowell, wow, he's a great economist. Such an irony. It must really hurt the left in the United States that the leader of economics of the right in the United States is an African American. Thomas Sowell, great author. So yeah, Basic Economics, a common sense to the economy, 9 out of 10. Good job, Thomas Sowell. So this was the average reader's review of Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, written by Thomas Sowell in 2000, but this is the edition of 2015. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I will see you guys next time.